Alright, so in this video I will be going over spell and trap cards. Most spell cards you can activate during your main phase and only during your main phase. You can either activate them directly from your hand or set them and then activate them again at any point you like during the main phase. The exception to this is quick play spell cards, which you can tell by this symbol here, and I will go over these in a minute. One thing I would like to note is that some of them say magic card and some of them say spell card. This is because they used to be called magic cards before they were changed to spell cards. In my previous videos I noticed that I called them intermittently magic cards and spell cards. Just know that they're the same thing and that the official name is now spell cards. The first type that I'd like to talk about is normal spell cards. You notice that this doesn't have a symbol behind the name spell card, which indicates that it is a normal spell card. These cards you just activate from your hand. Usually they'll do something right then, and then afterwards go to your graveyard. A lot of them will do things like draw cards, like Upstart Goblin, or they'll search cards from your deck, like Reinforcement of the Army. And there are also ones like Dark Hole, which will destroy all monsters in the field. So there is a huge variation in normal spell cards in terms of what they'll do for you. But for the most part, you just activate them during your main phase, and then they'll go to the graveyard after it does what it says on the card. The next type are equip spell cards. These are indicated by a plus over here. So equip spell cards, for the most part, will be equipped to a monster when it's on the field. So when you activate them, they'll target a monster on the field. Some of them target monsters in other locations, but those ones will specifically say that they target a monster in a different location. Most of these will do something basic like adding attack to the monster, and this actually adds both attack and defense. For the most part, equipped spell cards are bad and you don't want to play them. The exception is largely cards that do stuff besides just adding attack or something of that nature. For example, Different Dimension Reincarnation is actually an example of one that targets a monster in a different location. So as you can see here, it says to target one of your banished monsters. Also note that it has a cost. You have to discard one card to activate it. So you would discard any card from your hand to the graveyard. And then you then special summon the banished monster, and this will attach itself to the monster. Equip cards in general, when the monster either leaves the field or becomes face down, the equip cards will destroy themselves and go to the graveyard. The next type of spell card I want to talk about is continuous spells. So these ones are indicated by sideways 8 or an infinity sign there. And so these cards you activate just like equip and normal spells during your main phase, except when you activate these, they'll just stay up on the field, and unless they're destroyed or they say to destroy themselves, they'll just stay face up on the field forever. And a lot of them, like Dimensional Fissure, will have a passive effect that just stays active as long as the card is face up. For example, this one will banish all cards that are sent to the graveyard. Some of them work a little differently. Tenki, for example, has an effect that activates when you activate it initially. It'll add a card from your deck to your hand, and then after that, it'll have a passive effect, which is its continuous effect in this case, where it just adds 100 attack to all Beast Warrior monsters. And then the last type of continuous spell that I'd like to talk about is Archfiend's Oath. So this type has an effect that you can activate once during your main phase every turn, which is different from these two, whereas this one just has a passive effect, and then this one has an effect that activates once when it's first activated, and then has a separate passive effect. This one has one that you manually activate every main phase. The next type of spell that I like to talk about is field spells. So these ones are indicated by this symbol here. It's kind of like a plus like the equip, but it's a little bit different. You can see the difference between the two. And so field spells Unlike the other ones, you don't activate in the spell and trap card zones, you activate in the field spell zones over here. So I talked about these a little bit earlier in my basics video. So field spells are a lot like continuous spells. Some of them, like Necro Valley, will have passive effects that affect both players. Sometimes the effects will only affect you, though, so it depends on the field spell. Another type of field spell is Dragon's Ravine. So this is kind of like Archfiend's Oath, where it has a once per turn effect that you can activate. In this case, you discard any card from your hand to the graveyard, and then you would send a dragon. So you check that it's a dragon. You can send it from your deck to the grave. And you can do this once per turn during your main phase. And this is an example of a card where you can use the effect, but your opponent can't. Some of the field spells where you can manually activate it during your main phase, both players will be able to manually activate it during your main phase. So you just have to read the card and check to see if it allows for both players. Normally with spell and trap cards, if you have all of the zones full, say you have 5 cards set in your 5 zones, like this, then you cannot play any spell or trap cards until one of your spell or trap cards is removed from the field somehow. Field spells are different. If you want to play a field spell and you already have one, you can either just activate one and the first one will be destroyed and sent to the grave, or you can choose to set one and the first one will still be destroyed and sent to the grave. The next type I'd like to talk about is ritual spells. So ritual spells are indicated by, it looks like a fire right there. So these are used to specifically summon ritual monsters, which are blue monsters. These go in your main deck. I specifically have not mentioned these before because I wanted to talk about them when I talked about ritual spells. So with most ritual spells, you activate them to summon a specific monster. It'll say on the card which monster it summons, and the monster will also say on it which card summons it. So here it says that it summons Blackluster Soldier, and Blackluster Soldier says that it's summoned by the Blackluster Ritual, which you can see are each of these respective cards. For most ritual spells like this one, you will have to tribute monsters from your hand or field that equal the level of the monster you're ritual summoning. So in this case 8. So for example, if you had a Hanzo in your monster zone and a Jinzo in your hand, it would be 4 plus 6 equals 10. So you could tribute both of these to special summon Blackluster Soldier from your hand by activating Blackluster Ritual during your main phase. There are also some rituals, like for example Advanced Ritual Art, that can summon more than one monster. For example, this one says you can summon any one ritual monster using this card. So, for example, you can summon a Herald of Perfection. Even though it says to summon it with Dawn of the Herald, you can still summon it with cards like Advanced Ritual Art. So, this one, since it can summon any, works a little bit differently. For this one, you have to send a normal monster from your deck to the graveyard. And in this case, it has to equal the exact level, so 6 and 6. You can send more than one that add up to 6. So, for example, you could send a level 4 and a level 2. But they have to be normal and they have to be exactly 6. This is more strenuous than normal. Like, for this one, you could send equal to 8 or more than 8, and you can also send effect monsters and normal monsters. Newer ritual spells like, for example, Necro's Mirror will possibly be able to summon monsters from locations other than the hand, or tribute monsters from places other than the hand and field, similar to how Advanced Ritual Art could tribute from the deck. And some of them will have additional effects in addition to summoning the ritual monster. So for stuff like that, you just have to read the card and see what it says. The last type of spell that I like to cover is quick play spells. So these are indicated by a symbol here that looks kind of like a lightning bolt. So these ones are kind of like half in between spells and trap cards. When they're in your hand, you can activate them at any point during your turn from your main phase to the end phase. And you can chain them to cards like a trap. So for traps, when your opponent activates something, you can chain your card to their card and have your card resolved first, using the chain link, which is a concept I will explain in my next video. Quick play spells can be chained to other cards just like traps can. So in addition to being able to activate them from your hand at any point during your turn only, you can use them kind of like traps. As soon as they become set, they become more like traps than spells. So when you normally set a spell card, you can just right away activate it during your main phase. But when you set a quick play spell, you have to wait until your opponent's next turn to activate it, just like a trap. And then as soon as your opponent's draw phase starts, you can activate a quick play spell at any point during either their turn or your turn following that. As long as the quick play spell doesn't have a specific activation time that it specifies. For example, some traps like Torrential Tribute will tell you when you can activate them. So some cards like Book of Moon, for example, are thought of as almost being like traps because you can use them during your opponent's turn, and in many cases they're more effective being used during your opponent's turn. But quick plays do have the benefit of being able to activate them from your hand as spells. Now, as I've said previously, trap cards have to first be set before you can activate them. You cannot activate them from your hand unless there's an effect allowing you to specifically to do that. Generally, that's not allowed. And you cannot activate traps the first turn they're set. So you have to set them, wait for your opponent's turn, and then you can activate them at any point starting from their draw phase all the way through to their end phase. And again, on your turn, after that point, you can activate it at any point on your turn also, from all the way from your draw phase through to your end phase. So, Compulsory Evacuation Device is an example of a normal trap. Just like normal spells, they do not have any special logos. These cards, just like normal spells, you activate them and then they go to the graveyard after one use. Compulse does not have any limits on when you can activate it, but many traps do have limits. So I was saying you can activate them at any point, but that's unless there is some factor limiting when you can activate them. And if there is, it'll say on the card. So for example, Torrential Tribute says that you can only activate it when a monster is summoned. And Mirror Forge says that you can only activate it when an opponent's monster declares an attack. So if a trap can only be activated at a specific time, it'll say at the beginning of the trap when it can be activated. The next type of traps is continuous traps. So once again, these are very much like continuous spells. And they have the same logo as continuous spells. A lot of continuous traps will be like Royal Decree, where it's very much like Dimensional Fissure, with just having a passive effect that just stays active as long as the card is face up on the field. Another example of a type of continuous trap is called a Haunted, which is somewhat similar to Tenki here, in that it does something when it's first activated, and then it has a passive effect. So in the example of Call the Haunted, you target a monster in your graveyard, and then summon it in attack mode. And then after that, Call the Haunted is attached to Hanzo, and if Call the Haunted is removed from the field or Hanzo is destroyed, the opposite one will destroy itself. So stuff like this, you just have to read the card, and it'll say on the card how it functions. Finally, there's Blaze Accelerator Reload, which is an example of a card kind of like Archfiend's Oath, where you can activate it once per turn as long as it's face up on the field. In this case, you can only use it during your opponent's main phase, which is a condition stated on the card. And the last type of trap card that I would like to go over is counter traps. So counter traps are indicated by this kind of arrow here. So counter traps are unique in that they're spell speed 3, the highest spell speed. This is a concept I'll get into in my next video, but basically what it means is that normally with trap cards, you can chain them to other trap cards to have your trap resolve first. So for example, if a monster happened to be normal summoned, then, like, say you normal summoned a Hanzo, you could activate Hanzo's effect because it's a trigger effect that triggers when it's normal summoned. Your opponent then could chain to that effect with their trap card, say a Torrential Tribute, to destroy all monsters in the field. The player who played Hanzo could then chain their own trap card, say a Compulsory Evacuation Device, to return their Hanzo to the hand, so the Hanzo would not be destroyed. You can also chain quick play spells or quick effect monster effects. And all of these traps, quick play spells, and quick play monster effects are all spell speed 2, so you can all chain them to each other. However, counter traps like these are spell speed 3, so for example, if a player activated Torrential Tribute and the other player responded by using Wiretap, neither player could then chain any trap cards unless they were a counter trap, because you can only chain counter traps to counter traps. Counter traps tend to be cards that will negate something to prevent it from happening. So it'll negate something like the activation of a card or the summon of a monster, like Solemn Warning can negate the summon of a monster. So that's it for my video on spell and trap cards. My next video I will be covering some more intermediate concepts in Yu-Gi-Oh! These first 4 videos have covered most of the basics, so you could probably actually play games based on just what I've told you through these first 4 videos, though watching my next 4 videos will definitely help with understanding a few things about the game.